This episode of Tekzilla is brought to you by Domain.com.
A self-described epiphany addict, described as part Timothy Leary, part Ray Kurzweil, and part Neo from The Matrix, repeats, I want to see some bullet time effects during this interview. Jason Silva is a filmmaker, futurist, and has performed at Google, the Economist Ideas Festival, TED Global, the Singularity Summit, the PSFK Conference, is the host of Nat Geo's Brain Games, and just launched Shots of Awe on Test Tube, which gave us a chance to get Jason in studio to talk about the future, technology, and just exactly what being an epiphany addict means. Jason, welcome to Tekzilla.
Thank you for having me, man. Thank you. And thank you for that introduction.
Hey, do you sleep?
It's a little bit hard for me to get to sleep sometimes. I need to make sure that I put in some buffer time to unwind, which means like a nice long hot shower, a bath, usually tuning out slowly to some kind of comfort food film.
Right.
You know, like a movie that's just comforting to watch and reassuring and just kind of eases me into sleep mode. So that's what it takes.
And then you wake up 45 minutes later and write an entire treatise on the future.
You know, it's happened sometimes. That's more when I'm jet lagged. You know, I find myself traveling across the world sometimes to do these big keynotes, and I'll wake up at 2 in the morning with exactly the way I want to start my speech the next day. But if I'm not jet lagged, I'm pretty good at doing my 6-7 hours of sleep, believe it or not. Yeah.
Well, what's an epiphany addict?
Well, I think epiphany addict is kind of like when Carl Sagan coined the term wonder junkie. It's this idea that the desire to be elated, the desire to experience aesthetic rest, the desire to be enlarged by something greater than yourself becomes a defining attribute of who you are as a person. So it's like, as a child, realizing that I was only really satiated. My existential itch was only scratched when I was absolutely ravished, when I was ravished by something transcendent, when I felt that kind of, rhapsodic ecstasy that the shamans talk about, that the artists talk about. So
everybody mocks the Grand Canyon until you're standing in front of it and you just suddenly see what water and 40,000 years can do, and you just get knocked back on your heels.
Yeah, I mean, people say that the sublime and that experiences of awe are sort of direct responses to encountering something that is so much bigger than you are, something that pushes your perceptual parameters to new widths. You know what I mean? Like literally, your mental models of the world have to be reconfigured to assimilate the scope and scale of that download. And it can be something that's, purely perceptual, like something spatial, or it can be psychological. It can be like a sort of psychological epiphany that you're having. But the point is, these moments are encounters with the sacred. They are encounters with the transcendent. They are what religion has been engineered originally to do. You build beautiful cathedrals to make you experience that awe and make you feel closer to the divine.
You're a big Teilhard fan, I bet.
What is that?
Pierre Teilhard, the Onosphere, the idea that we can
Pierre
accept.
de Chardin?
Yeah.
I love that guy.
I'm horrible at pronouncing, but he's a fascinating human being.
Oh, I love. He wrote The Phenomenon of Man, and he was a Jesuit priest that was thrown out of the Catholic Church, basically, because he had these ideas where he kind of merged the sort of divinization and the idea that, man was on this like divine journey of transformation, caterpillars into butterflies, as Timothy Leary would say. And the omega point was his term for what ultimately sounds a lot like the singularity, this idea that, complexity was bootstrapping on its own complexity, that evolution had a direction of some sort, that life was anti-entropic, so even though we have entropy breaking everything down to its simpler constituents, there's this thing called life, which is an exception, and life transcends its boundaries. Life moves towards greater complexity. And
he was also trying very hard to reconcile the spiritual and the scientific in a way where they just wouldn't keep slashing into each other's throats.
Totally. Well, it was like that Richard Holmes book, The Age of Wonder, that talks about a time when all the scientists were poets and all the poets knew about astronomy and science. This realization that there is something kind of sublime and, I don't want to say religious, but definitely transcendent about science and the search for truth. Religion and science both claim that they are searching for truth. It just so happens that science seems to deliver a little bit more. Technology seems to deliver a little bit more. People say the singularity just sounds like the rapture of the geeks. The singularity has just been a word that's been used to replace heaven. This thing that's going to happen, that's going to transform us, and we're going to become immortal. But what I say is, it doesn't have to be a coincidence. Rather, religion and the urge that mankind has to transcend our own limitations, it's sort of written into our Constitution. And perhaps religion was just a rehearsal for what we're inevitably going to do with technology, engineering, and science. We use engineering and technology and science to transcend and subvert entropy, to transcend our limitations, to do things that make us godlike beings. We are omnipotent. We are omniscient. I mean, the fact that we have access to all the repositories of human knowledge instantly on Google is pretty godlike, Kevin Kelly says, can you imagine anything more addictive than being a god? And I'm like, yeah, I can't. Mr. Kelly. Not that they exist yet, but we might be on our way to becoming that.
So let's pull a little bit back. The singularity is sort of an evolution of conscious that we can't envision because we have our simple human brains at this point. We do have to stop, think, search, get the search correct, find the information, hope the information is vetted, hope the information is accurate, which if there is a higher conscience, we hope it doesn't have to have its information vetted because it knows everything. I mean, you are a big thinker in, obviously, in case you haven't figured this out, the man thinks in large, large terms, right? So the singularity, the evolution of human intelligence into a super intelligence, does technological evolution in the short term bore you? I mean, are you over the internet and cell phones and wireless global access? And
I'm not over it because I trained my brain against hedonic adaptation. So hedonic adaptation is a feature of the brain in which novelty quickly becomes banal. So a marvel like the iPhone, becomes boring within 6 months to the average person. They're like, where's my upgrade? Where's the next thing? That constant desire for the new, that constant desire for novelty being the only thing that fires up our dopamine, is probably what's responsible for that restlessness that makes us constantly progress, on the one hand. On the other hand, the consequence of this hedonic adaptation is that we quickly grow bored of the marvels that surround us. We don't give attention to that which is always around. That which is always around becomes invisible. Now, that is a problem with long-term relationships. It's also a problem with we never stop and smell the roses. Or Henry Miller said even a blade of grass, if given proper attention, becomes a magnificent world in itself. So how do we decide what to pay attention to? Do we always stay on the cutting edge of the new in order to advance ourselves? Or do we learn how to appreciate what we already have? Or is it a balance between the two? That is ultimately the question. But to answer your question, I try to marvel at what is and also at what could be.
So how do you stop? I mean, how do you personally stop to marvel at what is?
Well, I think it has to do with how you manage your attention, where you orient your awareness. I'm a big movie buff, and I was reading this article in a website called Reality Sandwich that was on virtual reality and hallucination. And she talked about technologies of rhetoric, like language, like storytelling, like cinema, these technologies that capture and manage our attention and can place our attention wherever they wish, right? And only when our attention is fully captured, only when we are completely immersed in something, does any kind of interpersonal transformation or persuasion or education take place. So movies are so efficient at giving us these transcendent epiphanies because they completely suck us in, they absorb our attention completely. But in our modern world of infinite distractions, it's very hard to decide where to focus our attention.
You don't find epiphanies in Twitter or Facebook posts?
Sometimes.
Had my 17th day of roast beef for lunch today.
Well, I think, again, that's why the information diet is such a crucial thing. If you follow really smart, interesting people on Twitter, then you can create a kind of engineered serendipity per se. You can have a situation where you'll stumble upon fascinating things because you're using these brilliant people as basically filters for what you should be paying attention to. So how you choose to focus your attention, who you choose to follow on things like Twitter, how you basically choose to spend your time is ultimately going to determine the kind of subjective experiences you have.
I'm trying to decide now if you
We've talked about a lot so far.
Well, it's funny, right?
Where are we?
We're all over the map, but that's okay. I mean, do you have a private Facebook with 400 friends, or do you basically create, like you just said, you're sort of, it's funny, it's hard. It's hard to reconcile the singularity and these sort of larger topics with Facebook, but the reality is they're all kind of enmeshed.
Yeah, well, I think that, primarily I use Facebook as a broadcasting medium now. So I use it as a place to share interesting links. So I can be a transmitter, a transceiver rather. So I will follow interesting people on Twitter. I will stumble upon serendipitously fascinating pieces of content, and then I will receive those and then transmit those outwards, both through Twitter as well as Facebook. I used to be a big fan of the Friends in Common feature on Facebook, which is a good serendipitous way to connect with interesting people. I'm like, wow, we have 55 friends in common. We must meet if we haven't met yet, which is kind of fascinating. But then it's very difficult to edit the news feed on Twitter. So I find that a lot of the times when I log in, the stuff that shows up on the front page is not really that interesting to me. I find it easier to curate my experience on Twitter. So since then, I've turned to Facebook more as a broadcasting platform purely. So.
Do you love 144 characters and the compactness of Twitter? Or does that...
I mean, it's a quick way to share bait. So Throw some bait out there in 140 characters, hopefully that leads down a rabbit hole to something far richer. Because at the end of the day, 140 characters might serve as that hook, as that bait, but I crave a deeper experience. I want okay, that sounds fascinating. Is the subsequent link or article going to be as all-absorbing and amazing as the promise of that 140 characters implied?
And if it's not, you unfollow.
If it's not, you unfollow. Yes, exactly.
One last question before we go. Radical openness, you were talking at, I want to say, TED Global 2012.
Yeah.
Radical openness, is this sort of like open source software, the open internet, access to information and global communications?
Yeah, well, the theme of TED Global in 2012 was radical openness. That was like the meta theme of the conference that summer. And the co-curator, Bruno Giussani, he asked me if I would create a video that would sum up that theme. And I had been waiting for the opportunity to sort of become a part of TED from the perspective of the stage.
Right.
I had been in the audience multiple times.
You seem tailor-made for TED, being on the stage.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, for me, it was just like I got so much out of TED, just like I get so much out of films. It's like these experiences affect me so much. I was getting such a sort of ravishing download, that I was like, how can I give back? How can I create some kind of content that adds to that conversation? I'm not a PhD, I'm not an academic, but I am an artist that could distill a lot of these meta themes into these compelling forms of narrative, which is my philosophical espresso shots. And so when they asked me to make a video on radical openness, I thought, well, what is the kind of broad, big theme here? To create spaces in which ideas can have sex, to talk about ideas as replicators, as Dawkins used to talk about. Ideas as things that mutate, that intermingle, that spread from brain to brain, that compete for the resources of our attention. I thought that was a beautiful metaphor to understand this new world in which we've basically transcended biology, and now we spread information through memes. We've gone from genes to memes. And if we want to accelerate evolution, just like we want to support biodiversity of genes, we should support the biodiversity of memes, or just the diversity of memes. And that was kind of like the whole thing about being radically open so that these memes can fully spread.
Which is pretty wild, because of lolcats, we tend to think of memes as being these it's the thing with the cat and the letters, but memes are actually ideas in the sense of freedom in the Middle East, or breaking down authoritarian governments.
Absolutely.
It's pretty cool.
Memes are replicating units that spread information, like genes. I mean, and that's what I think that metaphor is so brilliant. Yes, yes. So it's a beautiful thing.
Shots of Awe, testtube.com. What's Shots of Awe all about?
So Shots of Awe is basically, it's a series of shorts that build on my philosophical espresso shots. So I've been doing these philosophical espresso shots independently that aim to capture and bottle inspiration. Those impermanent, fleeting moments of rhapsody that artists talk about when they have these epiphanies. Whatever it is that happens to us that results in a painting or in a song or in a film, genuine inspiration. I wanted to capture that because these moments tend to be so impermanent and so fleeting, and for a control freak like me, it was like this idea that can I engineer inspiration? And then can I bottle it? Can I take a picture? Can I bring back a souvenir from the ecstatic state?
That's a big goal.
Well, I know it is, but I feel like, life only has meaning when we have big goals, But it's this idea, I refused, like Dylan Thomas says, do not go quietly into that good night, rage against the dying of the light. And if you think of inspiration as the light, I don't want to accept the dying of the light, And so the goal with these videos was to have functional output from ecstasy. I was having these ecstatic moments, these ecstatic downloads. I was drinking in the universe, what Timothy Leary says, the hardly bearable ecstasy of direct energy exploding from your nerve endings. But I wanted to bring back a souvenir, a picture, a photograph, a video. And these videos have transformed my life. They are the reason that Nat Geo discovered me and hired me to host Brain Games, their highest rated series now. They are the reason that I travel the world doing international keynotes on the future of technology and imagination. And finally, when I connected with you guys, they're the reason that now we took my philosophical espresso shots, rebranded them as Shots of Awe, and are releasing new videos weekly. And if you don't get some intellectual jolt from watching these, you should check your pulse, because they are rhapsodic, they are intense, and they are ultimately my art.
It's a beautiful thing. Jason, thank you so much for
Thank you so much, brother. And if you guys want to keep the conversation going, I'm at Jason Silva on Twitter, and thank you for having me, brother.
Ladies and gentlemen, testtube.com is the place to find him. We want to thank Jason for coming on the show, and hey, let's take a moment to thank one of our sponsors.
Entrepreneurs and innovators are all turning ideas into realities online, backed by the strength of a .NET domain name. .NET is one of the world's most popular domain extensions, and a .NET domain name from domain.com will inject your business with instant credibility. Entrepreneurs and innovators will immediately discover the advantages of building their web presence around a .NET domain name. Already have a .com? Purchase the corresponding .NET from domain.com and protect your online brand. Is the .com you want already taken? The .NET is a perfect alternative. We like domain.com because they're affordable. A .NET address is only $8.99 a year. They're also reliable and easy to use. The guys at domain.com want to hook up our fans with an awesome offer. Get 20% off their already affordable domain names and web hosting when you use the coupon code Tekzilla at domain.com's checkout. That's 20% and big time savings. And don't forget to use the coupon code Tekzilla. And when you think domain names, think domain.com.